everybody. How are we going today? Hope that you've all had a wonderful morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you may be. Lovely to see you, and thank you so much for joining us for our second installment of the 3D animation series with the man, the myth, the legend. It is Moritz, our lead 3D animator. How are you going, Moritz?
I'm good. Waking up.
Waking up. Very, very good. I mean, it's only 11 a.m. So I've only been up for now like 6 hours. But
Brag much.
yeah. Just that healthy lifestyle, waking up at the crack of dawn, watching the sun rise. It's a bit of that, GM, everybody in the chat. It doesn't really matter what time it is, though, does it, Moritz? In Web3, it's awesome morning. So you are allowed to be waking up right now. That is totally fine. That is all as gold. Yes, well, everybody in the chat, welcome to a new year. It is, in fact, 2023, just in case you slept through it. How was your New Year's? How was your Christmas holiday period, guys? Tell me in the chat. Tell me where you are, what you've been doing. Moritz, how was your Christmas and New Year's? Did you have a good one?
I did have a good Christmas, and then not so much a good New Year's. The wife's got the corona, so we got locked down in the house. Not allowed to go anywhere. Or not supposed to anyway.
Right.
Oh, and that dragged out, so that was just the whole holiday. But Christmas was dope.
Christmas was good. Yeah, the kids enjoy it.
Yeah, they loved it. Going to the beach, going out the house in general.
Yeah, definitely. Oh dear, yeah, it was a bit of. I just spent it with family, so that was nice. And then over New Year's, I have I do this thing where we look after people who were like intoxicated at festivals. So we went over to one of these big festivals, Northern Base, and just helped people that were drunk, which was wonderful. Usually I have some amazing chaotic story to share from my New Year's of some patron coming in being crazy. But this year it was actually quite tame. So I was almost disappointed. Usually I have some crazy yarn to share, but this time, no. But I do have a festival that we're doing this weekend.
Yeah, it's buzzy. Because when we went to Raglan, we met a family there we had drinks with, and they were one of the ladies there. They're professional. Like, she worked at festivals, what you just said, like looking after drunk people, tending to the tents, medical aid, mostly just letting people sleep off their buzz.
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely a lot of that.
Like, but I picture that, I would have pictured that to be like super dangerous, like if people are like super drunk and,
Yeah, it definitely is a bit of that. Luckily, we have security and medical next to us, so we are well equipped for whatever the night may throw at us. But yes, it's been a fun time. Oh, actually, Zen said, so I did see Zen at New Year's, and I was just, as we had one of these little like spray bottles to spray people off if they were like, feeling hot, like one of those misters. And I was doing that through these like crowds and crowds of people. And then I saw Zen, and I was like, oh my gosh, hello. Scooted him down, a bit of that. It was very lovely. So yeah, it's been good. But how's everybody going with the sacrifice? We've had a couple more words this morning. Information has been released this week, a little bit more about what is going on with the sacrifice. Are we saving or sacrificing our seekers in the chat? Can I please see where you stand so I can ban you before we start, or whatever you fancy? Max Poker says saving. That's interesting. I swear I've heard you once or twice before say that you were going to sacrifice, but that's all right. He's trying to appease me today. Just kidding. Awesome. Never have. Well, probably not actually. But yeah. Anyway, Moritz, this is our first chat of the year. Do you want to go over a little bit on what we will be talking about today, the main focuses of today's chat?
Yeah, certainly. We had a chat based on sort of tickets that were raised and what the community was most interested in. Seemed to me that it was bringing your seekers into Unreal and using them within Unreal. But for the purposes of the 3D animation competition, I thought we start off by just quickly discussing how to actually render your animation in Blender and then how to composite it in Blender. Because if people don't, if you run out of time or you already have an animation, at least, you have something that you can commit to, because importing into Unreal is like, it's a beast of its own, I suppose, doing it properly. So we will be going over it today, but my base recommendation is be aware of how the Blender setup works and Blender compositing, and then I will also be going over how to get your seekers into Unreal, and yeah, we'll take it from there.
Cool. Perfection. And if you have any questions throughout the chat, anything that, you want us to chat about, or maybe that you're interested for us to touch on maybe next time, feel free to post your comments in the chat on the side, and we will get through them as much as we can. So this is going to be a big one. So buckle up, get ready to rumble. Moritz, would you like to take it away?
Sure. Okay. I will share my screen and then we'll get into it.
Oh yeah, that's true. That probably would be smart, wouldn't it?
See, entire screen. Do let me know if that is coming through correctly.
It is. There we are. Perfection. All right. Good as gold. Go for it, buddy.
So just before the stream, I went to the Fluff Undergrounds and downloaded a separate seeker from the one that I was using last time, just to mix it up. Let's open that up. So for the base animation, just to go over how to actually render your animation, because we went over animation, like how to actually animate last time. So you can check out the last stream that we did about how to move around in Blender and how to animate and all that, but we never actually touched on how to export your animations or render your animations. So this is your output settings here. If you scroll, you can set your resolution if you want to do a 1920 by 1080 and the frame rate, which you might want to leave at 30 FPS. The output, I don't know if Raphael has fixed this yet or not. The output is still set to an output path on my local machine. That's something we didn't consider when we did the file export settings and all that. So under output, just make sure that you set an output path on your machine where you want to save it to. So give it a name and accept. And we want to render it as a PNG sequence. Leave it at RGBA because we want to have the alpha channel. Set the compression to 0 and override if you're working out of the same directory, so that when you save it multiple times, it will just overwrite your files. And then that is, as far as like getting the animation to render, that's all you have to do. So F12 usually renders a single frame, and then Control F12 will render your animation. Otherwise, up here in the render tab, you can render animation from here. And then you just have to wait. Basically, what it does is like we have 240 frames in our timeline, which at 30 FPS is 8 seconds. And it will save each frame as a separate image in that sequence. So once you've done that and your animation has finished rendering, you can open a new file and you can add a new tab at the top and set it to video editing, and then video editing here. And this is Blender's compositor. So you can set your resolution here for your final composite, or how you want it. Your frame rate, set it back to 30 FPS. And then in here, we can set the file format to FFmpeg video. And under encoding, we want to set that to MP4. And H.264 is fine. And output quality, you can set that to high quality or higher, depending on what you want. And to actually get your animation in, you then go to Add, and then Image Sequence, and then wherever you have something saved out. So here's some older ones that I've rendered for, let's see, I've rendered so many over the time, so let me just find one. That looks right. Have it so that you order them by name. So it starts with 00 because the order of it is important. 00 to 240 frames, I think. Yeah. And then we add the image strip, and then you get your seeker with alpha in your scene. And if you press play, which is shift space in my case, and other people's cases it might be different, you can watch your animation back. At the moment, our timeline is set to 250 frames, so that's why you saw it disappear there at the end. So make sure that your frame and end match the animation length, and then it should loop again. And then to bring in a background, we will go to Add, and then so if you render, you can import a video file, like a movie file. It doesn't really matter. You could import or you could just use a color. You could use image sequence or a single image as a background for your seeker. So it really doesn't matter. So in my case, like we will go to the backgrounds that we used for the actual pipeline, so the asteroid belt in this case. Grab the 1920 by 1080 one, and you just drag it in here. Set it to frame 1, and then you can click on the right side of this, press G to move it, and then just move it all the way across. And then because this layer is currently on top of our seeker, we can either flip them around, or you can change this from alpha over to alpha under, and then your seeker is on top of it. And then you've got a very basic composition. There's more you can do with the compositor, depending on how you set up your export settings for your frames and that. You can composite more than just 2 layers, but when you're all satisfied, you set your output path where you want to save your movie file to, and give it a name. And then again, you just hit render and then render animation. And rendering this animation is fairly quick. So you can see like it just steps to the frames, because it doesn't actually have to do the computing for the lighting or anything. It's just stepping through the frames and rendering it out as an animation. You can also duplicate strips to make your animation longer. So if you wanted to have it twice as long, or because this is a looping animation, you can select your animation strip. You can press Shift D to duplicate, and then if you just let go, it like automatically snaps to the end of it. And then just make sure to do the same for the background. So now it's twice as long. Not that there's any purpose in doing so, but you can, I guess you can see how you can like layer and put together multiple multiple layers to composite whatever you want to composite. And then the final, there's our final movie file there. MP4 works fine. Cool, very basic, very quick way to composite in Blender. So hopefully that will be enough. And I mean, if people still have questions, like just open tickets or ping me on Discord. I'll always answer whatever questions people might have. And then next, I thought we will go over how to actually go into Unreal. Does that seem okay, Monty?
Yep.
Yeah, covered enough there.
Good as gold.
Okay, now the import process to bring this whole thing over to Unreal is quite involved. So, and that was it assumes that people have sort of a general understanding of the pipeline and how stuff works, but we'll do our best to just go over today. So we don't need our render, and we don't need our effects collections now. We're just going to focus on how to get this guy over into Unreal. So we'll start off, we'll put him into rest position. And one thing to note is that Unreal works in centimeters, and the default unit scale in Blender is meters. So whatever you do in Blender, if you were to export it into Unreal, is going to show up either. So there's different export options to just get it to look right. If we use FBX all, for example, it discards the unit scale and just exports it. But that will scale your bones by 100. So it's less optimal to do it that way. What you really want to do to... am I still live?
You're live.
Oh, so something went wrong. Okay, cool. So unit scale is different. We're in centimeters. And what we want to do at the start of this is go to the world settings here, the scene properties, and we're already in a metric system, just that we're not in centimeters. So we just changed that to 0.01 to come to centimeters. And what that means is now our seeker, where he was before, let's say a meter, now he's 1 centimeter. So it's still not fixed, because if we were to try and export that to Unreal, we would get a tiny, tiny seeker. And because if I try to scale this, you can see like everything just kind of blows up or starts like falling apart. So we'll tackle this one at a time. So what I'll do is I'll disable all the other collections other than the chassis to start with, so we can focus on one at a time. Except for expression, we do want the eyes with, and we don't need the gropeboard eyes. Don't worry about it. So this is our seeker. He is now tiny, 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 1 centimeter or 2 centimeter. I don't actually know the correct scale. So if we zoom out, you can see like there's also clipping issues. Our grid is sort of fading out. And that's just because our scene is quite large now. So if we press N to bring up the properties panel and then have a look here for our view properties, you can see our clipping distance here is set to 10 meters. So that's not very far considering that we're now working in centimeters. So just set that to something large, 500 meters, a kilometer, whatever you want, just so that we can see a bit further. And next, we want to select under the chassis our armature itself. And we want to scale that up by 100. So to bring it times 100 to bring it back to meters, because it was in centimeters. This is still not correct, because the transform properties on your rig will still tell you like this is just scaled up by 100. So we have to apply the scale on the rig. And if we do that, you can see if you have one that has widgets on it, like they will disappear because they're now really shrunk down, but that shouldn't matter to us either. And as soon as we apply the scale on the armature, that means all the children that are currently parented to that armature will receive the 100 scale. So you can go through everything by like select everything and apply the scale on these as well. But there is some like meshes in your that might have more than one user. So that's what you call a special duplicate. In terms of what that means is that if we have a cube, and a special duplicate is if I press, instead of Shift D, I press Alt D, these objects are basically linked. So whatever I do to one, the other one does. And what that means is that if I try to apply transforms to it, it will tell me that, it will give you an error message saying like, hey, I can't do this because like multiple users are using the same information. So I'll disable the widget collection, which I think that's where it's from. Select the hierarchy, we'll try it again, and that worked. And now everything in here should be scale 1, and that's what we want. Make sure this still looks fine. That looks fine. Cool. Now the animation, that's going to be the next thing that's going to be broken. So if we put our seeker back into pose mode, you can see that doesn't look right. And that is because our bones, where they previously moved the meter, they're only moving 1 centimeter now. And the way to fix that is to change your dope sheet for a second to the graph editor. And we select the rig. We tab into pose mode. We select all the bones. And now we want to filter just by location. So these are all the curves that deal, these are all the curves that are dealing with location. And we want to select all of them. And then we want to select the properties panel on the right side. And again, we want to go to view. And here we can see our cursor is set to 0 and 1. So we'll just set that to 0 and 0. And then if we press the full stop next to your right shift key, we can change our origin to 2D cursor. And then we want to press S, Y. So we want to scale it on the Y axis, and we want to scale it by 100. So all the bones are now moving again 100 times further than they would have. And that should fix your animation and bring it back to where it should be. Okay, so this is our base animation, and I'm just going to give it a name. I'll call it idle instead of base layer. I'll give it a fake user. And what a fake user does, I think we went over this in our last tutorial, but just as a refresher, if you make more than one animation and an animation is not assigned to the armature or anything else in the scene, that means Blender will not recognize, will recognize it as a user that doesn't have a parent, like nothing is using it. So the next time you save your Blender file and you open it again, it's going to get rid of it. And to prevent that from happening, you press the little fake user icon, the little shield, to shield it from being destroyed. Okay, so this is our idle animation, which is fine. And then next up, we also need a T-pose animation for Unreal, so that Unreal knows, like, what does your seeker look like in its default state. So I'll unlink this action for the time being. I'll create a new action, and I will call this one T-pose. I'll go to frame 0. I'll select all the bones, and I'll press Alt-G, Alt-R, and Alt-S, which clears the transforms for movement, location, rotation, and scale. And then with your keying set to whole character, so in your timeline, you open with your timeline, you go to keying, and under active keying set, I'm going to set whole character. And then I'll just press I. I just want the whole character keyed down on one frame in its T-pose, so that we can bring it into Unreal. Like, this is what it's going to use. And I want to press the little fake user icon here again, just to save it off. Make sure that if I change it to something else, like, nothing is going to happen. All right. Now we can change our timeline from timeline to the nonlinear animation. And with the rig selected, we can see here we have the T-pose. And if we change in the dope sheet what kind of animation we're currently using, say the idle, then you can see this updates to idle down here. And all we want to do is we want to enable the V1 standard, as we want to use nonlinear animation strips for it. And then I click the little, like, drop-down icon to make an NLA strip out of it. And as you can see, the whole thing kind of just blew up. So we want to change the blending from add to replace. And extrapolation, we can just leave it nothing. You don't want this, like, strip to go on forever. And now we have this animation stored in the rig as a nonlinear animation strip. And then we can swap this one back to T-pose and disable that for a second and bring that down as well and change that again to replace and nothing. So if we scrub through here, if we put our rig back into, oh, it's already in post position. Right. Make sure these animations are enabled. So on frame 0, we have the T-pose, and then if you go forward, you have your idle animation, or in this case, the hover animation, or whatever you end up calling it, it doesn't really matter. So at frame 0, we can then select everything and make sure everything has enough resolution. Like I can see it here, like this is a little bit jagged. So if we go into our subdivision, this is actually subdivision 3, or it doesn't look right, probably because we have simplify enabled. So set simplify to 2 maybe. Yeah, maybe 3. I don't want this to be like too many polygons for Unreal, because Unreal is still a game engine. You can definitely use this model for cinematic purposes inside of Unreal, but depending on how complex your scene is. I mean, Unreal 5 handles a lot of shit, so it should be fine. But I'm just saying, if you have an older machine, the higher the polygon count, like the more obviously the engine is going to struggle. Blender is specifically designed to handle this sort of stuff, and it's not real time, so there's a lot more going on in real time in Unreal than it is in Blender. So either way, we can now select our rig by pressing right click and select hierarchy. And then we also want the eyes down here in our expression. So control left click on that, just so that we grab everything. Then we go to File, Export, and we want to export an FBX file. On our desktop, I'm just going to make a new export directory here. And I think this is a good name. I like the fact that it like names it to what seeker it is. I already got my Unreal settings saved as a preset, so once we go over this now, but like once you've done your export settings, make sure that you press the little plus icon here and you type in Unreal or whatever you want to call your preset, so that way every time you open Blender and you want to export your FBX, you don't have to go through the settings again. So selected objects, you can disable empty camera and lamp. We don't really need them, but it doesn't really make a difference either. Or local, so this refers to the scaling of it. The forward axis and y axis, I'm not going to go into this now, but basically different types of software use different coordinate, like left-handed, right-handed coordinates, and depending on which axis the engine considers as an up axis, you might find that your models come in with like a -90 rotation. There's a lot of resources online that discusses like how to move files from Blender to Unreal, or from Blender to Unity, or Maya, or wherever else you want to go. So unit scale and transform space are 2 things to consider when you do that, just to make sure that you get clean transforms. Under geometry, you want to set your smoothing to face instead of normals only. And under armature, what people usually do is you will only want to export your deformed bones, but in our case, I do actually want to have the non-deforming bones exported as well, because I'll be using the bones for the propulsion, for the secondary item, like all the different target bones that I used in Blender to composite the seeker out of the various scenes. I'll be using those in Unreal again to do the same. And for bake animation, we do not want to export all the actions because we just saved our stuff down to NLA strips. We can check NLA strips, and then under my desktop export, I'll just put it there and export FBX. This is going to take a minute because it's going to bake through the animations and export everything.
Amazing. There sounds like there's a chainsaw massacre going on outside your house right now.
Sorry, it was a lawnmower massacre.
That's okay. I'm like, I thought you've got your headphones on so you can't quite hear it. I'm like, that's fine. That's all good.
I don't know if I can make my input like a little bit less sensitive, but
it's all right. We can hear what you're saying anyway, so it's not like it's distracting the whole thing. So that's all good.
My apologies. I can't tell the lawnmower guy to take a break.
Can you not?
Yeah. All right. So this is a seeker that I've set up earlier, which is the same thing. So if we go into, like, this is what we'll be aiming for, today just to recreate what we have. That's good. Yeah, just to have an understanding on how to composite this. And there is a lot of work. Like I put like over an hour into this yesterday to start pulling stuff over, and there's a lot to go over, to be honest. So I just made a secret directory and split it up into the same things that we have in. Well, we'll just go over it anyway. So I'll just delete everything and delete 8 folders and delete. So we have a clean. So just when you open a new project, you go to content, you make yourself a secret folder where you're gonna export everything into. Make a new folder for the chassis to begin with, and maybe in this case, because it's a V1 type chassis. So if you have different chassis, you can, if you have multiple like this can get quite, we call that, keep it organized from the start. If you're planning to do more than one seeker, is what I'm saying, I guess. And once you've done all the steps with one seeker, I don't think it will take you as long to do a second seeker. Either way, we're going to click on import and we go to our export folder and we grab the exported file there. As far as I know, I don't think I set any specific settings in here. So if there are any settings that deviate from what you have on yours, from what you can see here, just pause the video, I guess, and confirm like if stuff doesn't come across properly. Hit import all, give it a minute.
Oh, sorry, I'm back. I will
What's that?
filibust. I said, hi, I'm back. I'll filibust while there's waiting.
You filibust. Tell us more about Jesus.
Well, listen, I don't know a lot at the moment. I told you I'm reading. I'm not up to that part yet, okay? But how's everybody going in the chat? Are we getting it? Are we retaining the information? Oh, look, now you've got them going on, Fluff Jesus. Moritz, we've started something. We've started something here. Oh my gosh.
Our Lord and Savior, Fluff Jesus.
Fluff Jesus. It was Swole Jesus, and now it's Fluff Jesus, and now we're talking about it in the live stream. Is it finished? Oh, I was like, yes, I thought it had just finished. I was like, let's go. I was like, dang it. Awesome. While we're just waiting for that beautiful 20%. Yeah, if there are any questions in the chat, feel free. Or if you
the
just
import process doesn't usually take that long. I think because I changed to simplify in Blender to use a higher polygon count, this is going to take longer. So while you're working on this, just the initial step is just to get everything importing correctly. So I would leave it at subdivision level 1 in the simplify settings just to speed things up. And then once everything is done properly, then you can change it for your final export.
Sweet. Yes, I see Divine Hypnotoad is in the chat. They say, awesome tutorial so far, going to help a ton with this 3D comp. I hope it helps you win. I've seen some of your animation online. I want to see how it goes.
All right.
Anyway, back on.
Yeah, warnings like this, you can, I mean, it's pretty explicit about what it doesn't like. So we exported, and maybe that would have been better if we didn't export that in the first place. So what it is specifically complaining about is back here, there is a empty that I use for the offset on these coil rings. If you don't want that exporting, just press the little arrow like next to the name, and then that way it will not be selected next time you export. I'm not too worried about it. It doesn't do anything. It's just a warning saying like, hey, we have this empty here that doesn't have any like skinning weights associated with it. So I'm just going to leave it for now. It just means we have useless data in the file. But if everything worked out, we should at least have our seeker at the right scale. So that looks correct in the grand scheme of things in terms of how big he is. If we open up the skeleton, we can see that we've done it correctly. If we click on the bones, you can change them from local scale to world scale in here. So you can see, like, if you've done it wrong, you would see 100 over here, like all your bones are scaled up by 100. And why that is a bad thing for us, and at least in terms of what I want to achieve with this, is that people have clean files to work with, is that if your bones are scaled up by 100, then any socketing that you do to these bones would, you would have to shrink it down by 0.01, and it becomes a headache after a while. So this way, you have clean bones, clean scales, just what we're after. Cool. And then you might say, well, first of all, we do have our animations. Those worked out great. We got our idle, and we've got our T-pose, which doesn't do anything other than like informing the skeleton what it should look like by default. Let's start off then by creating a blueprint class where we're going to composite our seeker in afterwards. And we just want this to be an actor, and we call this seeker. And then you can, you call it whatever you want. Seeker, BP seeker, blueprint seeker. Open that up. And we start off by adding our skeletal mesh. So up here, little add skeletal mesh. And this will be our seeker. And then under mesh, we can select our seeker boy there. And then at the moment, this is set up to use an animation blueprint. So if you are planning to do a more complex animation, like cinematic purposes, where something gets triggered at certain points, you can use animation blueprints to say what animation plays at what point. This is beyond the scope of this tutorial. So for this purpose, I was just going to be using an animation asset, which means like a single animation, and I'll be using the idle file. And off he goes animating now. Beautiful. Compile, save, happy days. Then we go back to Blender, and now we have to work our way through all the other pieces. So I'll do maybe 2 other pieces, maybe 3, and then we'll talk about the textures. So toolbox, this is our toolbox, and where is our toolbox? It is tiny, because we haven't scaled it up yet. In Blender, we are compositing our seeker in a similar way, where we import the different collections into what we call like the composite scene, and then we're using constraints to constrain them to the correct target bones, and then that's how our seeker gets composited. And what that means is you can select the toolbox empty group here, and you can disable the copy transform. We don't want that right now. And we're just going to scale this up by 100 as well. And make sure, again, with everything selected, A to select everything, Control A, and we want to apply the scale. And nothing should have changed, really. It should still look the same. Then with everything selected again, so right-click, select hierarchy, and now we can just start exporting FBX, and we'll do seeker backpack, same export settings. If you don't have an armature and you don't have NLA strips, then there's nothing really to worry about. But if you want to prevent that from happening, then just turn it off, I guess, and export. And that goes much faster as well. Back in Unreal, we will go to our content, seeker, and here we'll have our backpack. And import and backpack. Now, a lot of materials are shared between the different meshes. So if we want to prevent it from creating additional materials, where, like, say we have a metal master material that the backpack uses and the chassis uses and maybe some other item uses, there is material import settings in here to prevent additional materials from being generated. So here it just says material import method, create new material, and then you can either create new instance materials, which means if it already exists, it creates an instanced version of that, or we also want to search all assets. And then hopefully this I can't remember. It changed in 5.1. Like the wording in 4.6, I feel was different than this, but I can't really remember. If we do it correctly, yeah, cool. So it just imports the materials now that are unique to this. But if we open this, we can see it has in fact like a metal master material and it has a body master material. But because our chassis already has those materials generated, it doesn't create duplicate materials, and it will save us a lot of work from like doing it multiple times. And then if we go back to our Seeker blueprint, and maybe we just stop playing that animation for the time being, we can import our, so this will be considered a static mesh. So you can add a static mesh, and we'll add it under the Seeker, and we'll call this one backpack. And then here we select our backpack. And then for parent socket, we just click on this and we type in TGT, which is target, and then backslot. And that is the reason why I wanted to export the non-deforming bones, because we can use them as targets or sockets, so to speak, for our external assets. And if I press play on the animation again, like this is going to follow that bone around and it's going to look correct. Cool. And we pause it again. And maybe, just for now, we'll also import the primary arm because he looks a little bit bare over there. So we go to our primary arm. And our primary arm is, in fact, well, I mean, it's scaled down again. So select the rig. And then we press S. And we want to scale this by 100. And then there is also, where is that happening? Some rotation that I've set on the mining drill. So just set that to 0 if it's not aligned with the axes. Again, we want to apply all transforms, or at least the scale. And then if we look at the animation on this, we already have animation data on this rig. I think I animated this through, yes, I did, through the animator, but other parts may be animated differently. For example, I know that I did a lot of animation for cameras and other pieces through drivers. So these are custom expressions to drive certain values. For example, if you go into the transform panel in here, you might find that some of your boxes are purple. I can probably find one to give a better example. One sec. Yeah, my wife wants something. I have to check in a sec. Let's see. The camera rotation. That I know that, yeah, if you find these purple fields, these are basically just little mathematical expressions to do the animation for me. And if you find that to be the case, you can still go into the animation and key it on frame 0 and key it on the last frame, and then recreate the animation that you have in drivers manually, or bake the animation. Like I said, this is quite complex to get everything over. This is not like a press a button and everything is there. It's quite technically involved, but I'm trying to cover as much of it as I can. So we set the arm. Cool. So the arm already has an animation, which is great. So we can look at the associated NLA strips already set to be an NLA strip, which is great. So we don't actually need the action on here for it to animate. And then we select our rig again, select hierarchy, do it on frame 0, and go File, Export, FBX, and then Seeker. Cool. And then don't forget to check bake animation again, because we do want to export that NLA strip as well. Okay. Back in Unreal again. The process at this point is more or less the same. So primary arm. We import our drill. And this is a new skeletal mesh because it's animated through bones. And hopefully, if everything goes well, it's doing its rotation business, which is great. But that means in our blueprint, instead of importing a static mesh for the drill, we can also import a skeletal mesh, another skeletal mesh. And this one will be the drill. Change that to be the drill. And again, we want to use the socket. In this case, it's the lower arm on the left side. And you can check in Blender if you're curious which should be the parent socket. You can always come in here and you can see the constraint symbol there where we did the copy transform in the first place. And you can see the target here, down here in the transforms, which one I used for the Blender file. And if we now associate the animation asset with this drill, it's animating. And I think in my case, I had 20 degrees on, was it this one? No, not that one, the other two. So 20 and 20 to get a nicer angle for the drill. And then again, if we put them back into play, that looks correct. And then this way, we are going to go through collection by collection, bring them over into Unreal, use the socketing system to recreate the seeker inside of Unreal the same way that it was basically constructed in Blender. Everything should have clean transforms, has the same UV maps. So there's also, maybe I'll quickly touch on this. So this guy has the propulsion on this particular seeker. Let me just save this as a new version. So we can open up the original. This particular seeker has a propulsion method, which is like the thrusters, and the thrusters will need a custom shader. If you go on the Unreal Marketplace, there's probably already a bunch of free assets that you could like import into your project that you could use shader-wise to recreate the thruster effect. Otherwise, like there's a ton of tutorials on Google. It's very straightforward to find something, copy it. Beyond the scope of this tutorial, I would say, I don't want to like get caught in the weeds. So the other seeker had the one that I did yesterday had a helicopter. So for the purposes here, we can definitely use that, and it brings a good point as well to the table. So if we just use the helicopter, and that's a good part, by the way, as well. If you own more than one seeker, once you have this, once you have this like in Unreal, your assets from different seekers, you can start compositing your seeker any which way you want, which is an added bonus in my opinion. So helicopter, is that what I called it? No. Oh, I forgot. I deleted it earlier. I think I might still have the asset lying around though. So propulsion and then import. What's that from yesterday? Metascanner tools, helicopter. Yeah. Cool. So this is just a static mesh, and we'll import it. Again, this is a new material. Otherwise, I would have remapped everything. And in here, helicopter and target socket will be TGT propulsion top bottom. And now it's static, which is also not what we want. So there's more tutorials on this online, obviously, but if you go to the event graph, you can write simple functionality. It's like a hacky way of doing code. Not hacky. I mean, it's Unreal's way of executing C++ files without you having to write code, which is nice. So if you right-click in here, you can get your functions. And what we want to do is add rotation to the helicopter. So if we type in rotation, I'm guessing we want local rotation. yeah, add local rotation as a function, and it's already selected the helicopter as a target, which is great. But you can also see your components over here. So you can drag them in and you say get helicopter. So if you wanted to rotate something else, you set that as a target. We want to use the event tick to call this function. And we want to do a make rotator. Yeah, make a rotator. We want to plug that into the delta rotation. And then if we have a look in our viewport again at our helicopter, we can see that the axis that we want to rotate around is the y-axis, denoted in green. So the pitch. To do that, under variables, you just press new variable, and this will be rotator speed. Change that to a float, expose it, and plug that into the Y. Select your nodes. You can press Q in your graph to align your nodes to keep it nice. Press compile to make sure everything compiles correctly. Go back to the viewport, and if we press play on this in the scene view, bring it up a bit, and we give it a rotator speed now. That's the variable that we just created. So let's say 10, I don't know, and press play. You've got a rotating helicopter. Beautiful. Okay. Let's go over some of the, nor is it mine, to be honest, divine hypnotoad. Let's go over the material stuff. So we have the screen glass master. That is the front of the seeker. And we have to go through these one by one, at least once. And that's the reason why we want to recycle the materials, because then you make them once, and then other materials that come into your scene, they're going to use the same materials. And then that was the whole point of using a procedural material base, was the fact that we can recycle them as much as we can in Blender, but it is by no means the way to go about it. If you want to make like super game ready assets, then you need to bake your textures into texture maps and make bespoke texture sets for bespoke pieces of your seeker. So this is a very, what do you call that? The idea behind this is that you can recycle as much of your work as possible. Okay, so this is a glass material, for example. So the first thing we want to do is change this to a translucent material. And then we also want to change this to a volumetric translucency volume. Cool. And that way we get access to both the metallic specular roughness as well as the opacity. For metallic on glass, I like to just use a high metallic value because glass is quite reflective. Specular, I stick with the default value, usually of 0.5, which is Blender's default value. I don't know if it's the same in Unreal. And then a low roughness because glass is super reflective. And then for the opacity, we are going to use a Fresnel node. And a Fresnel node is basically a dot product between where you're looking at a surface and its normals, and the further they are apart, the more opaque it becomes, so that when you look on it straight on, you will get more transparency. So put that into opacity, and we can see like this is now like a bubble, which is what we want. Have a look at our seeker again. You won't be really able to see this right now because, I mean, you can see kind of the specular reflection being caught there, but we'll do the screens master next because we can just set that value to black. And that way we can see the glass effect a little bit better. There you go. Like this looks correct now. I think next we'll do the eyes. Or in general, there's a lot of texture files still associated with your blend file, and I'll quickly show you how to grab those. So we jump back into Blender, and a lot of the textures in Blender are packed into the Blender file. So in order to grab those texture files, you can go File, and then go to external data, and then unpack resources, and then it tells you there's 29 files that needed to be unpacked, and then you just say use files in the current directory and create it when necessary. And that means that wherever your Blender file was, in my case, in my downloads, and where you extracted it, there's now a textures directory which contains the associated directories that are in that file. And you can, for the purposes of this tutorial, literally just take this entire textures folder and we'll drag it in here into our Seeker. Cool. So here's our texture folder, here's our textures. Beautiful. V1, and let's do the eyes next. For the eyes, we need a texture sampler. Texture sample. And our texture asset that we want to use is our eyes, Seeker eyes. And we really just want the alpha of this image. And we want to plug that into, 1 second, we got to change this one as well from opaque to masked. So we want to have some form of transparency, and masked is a cheaper version of transparency than using translucency, because translucency requires desorting. Not that it matters. We'll just plug that into opacity mask. And then we create also another value, another color value. So if we press 4 and left click, we can create a new vector 4 color value, and we can convert that by right clicking on it to a parameter, and we call this one emissive color, and plug the RGB value into emissive color, and then make that like a yellowish color. Cool. And then to increase the emissiveness, the bloom that the post-processing will be able to pick up on, we can multiply this value to give it a higher range. So we press M and click on the canvas to create a multiply node. We plug the RGBA value here. We press 1 and click on the canvas, which creates a float value. We can convert this one to a parameter as well, and we can call it emissive strength. And we plug that into the bottom part, and by default, let's say it's 5, and then chuck that into emissive color, and then you can already see in the preview that this is more bloomy. How are we looking? So, my standard. Did I or did I not export this without the ice? I did, didn't I? Okay, lucky we saved our other file. I think I know what it is. So, primary arms, open the chassis. So we select the glass and have a look. There's no ice. And why is that? Because the ice were also, like you can see, there's like 2 tiny dots there. And that's because I forgot to scale this one also by 100. So select your ice, and then press S, and then 100. And then save the scale. And then now you can see I'm using inside of Blender a shrink wrap modifier to project it onto the screen. So you can see it now clipping into the screen because the shrink wrap offset is no longer big enough now that everything is 100 times the scale. So 0.01. And now it's not clipping into the screen anymore, which is great, which is what we wanted. Cool. So go back to the chassis, right click, select hierarchy, select your eyes, select the rig file, export. Will just, at this point, you can save over your initial export. Oh, this is going to take a while again, isn't it? We'll see. What's that? Are you whistling, Monty?
Oh, sorry. I don't know that you can actually hear me. That's good. Oh, I forgot that my thing was. Oh, wow, my bad. Sorry. Hello. Good thing I wasn't like listening to something really loud or something in the background. That would have been so awkward. Wow. No, at least now you know that I was politely listening that whole time. So there we
Like
go.
somebody mowing your lawns?
Literally hot mic me every time. Like every time I go on anything, it's a hot mic. It's a hot mic for me. So DJ McEnergy's calling me out. It's true.
Yeah.
Can't
I
help
do
it.
hope that the next time, like if somebody watches this tutorial, they somehow get to the part where I fucked up the I part. Like if I could somehow shift that time frame to the start. Because they're
Well,
going like, oh, fuck.
yeah. Looks so good. Professional, that's what I always say. So good.
Okay, so we can at this point you don't have to re-import the whole thing. So hopefully this will fix it if I just click re-import on the pink asset, which is like the base asset which contains everything, and the re-importing is also going to take a while again. So entertain me, Monty. Keep entertaining.
I just muted myself so that because I was like, oh, he's back on. I'll just bounce, and then I was like, oh no, we're back. That's good. But I was gonna say it's okay because I think it was Futureverse podcast. He coagulated all of our other conversations that I had with Josh about decentralized comms, and he perfectly edited me out of everything. So there was no hot mic Monty. There was no cringe banter at the start. It was purely educational pieces. So maybe he will edit this and he will take out the eyes.
How boring would that be?
Yeah.
It's just take that whole snippet where I talk about fucking up and cut out the fucking up part and just be like, this is what we do first.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, and just for the questions in the chat, these are online. So after we've finished the stream, I upload them to YouTube. So you will be able to view them on YouTube afterwards. I think if you go onto the Seekers Discord now, you will see the first chat. So you can go in and watch that as well. So there are things there. All right.
All
Are you
right, back?
Rumble?
Yeah,
Cool.
yeah, we're back in it now. Okay. Some materials now also have textures that are already associated with it. For example, the metal material was actually done using textures. So this would be, if you look through the exported texture directory from earlier, you will see there is quite a few textures already there. One of them is metal. So we can use those instead of like creating a completely procedural material. And that one is using multiple texture samples, which is so inefficient, but yes. Okay, so we press T and click on the canvas to make texture samples. And then just to be sure, we want to make sure they're all using the right coordinates in the future as well. Not that it matters, but there's multiple UV channels going on, so it's good to create a texture coordinate object, and you can set it to 0, which is the default one, and this is what everything is set to by default. But if you want to change your UV channels to a different one, you can, and at least now you're aware of it. So we'll grab the what texture sets that we have again. Let me just check. Displacement, metalness, normal, and roughness. Okay. So color. So when you select something in your browser and then you click on a texture sample where it expects an asset, you can press that little arrow here to use the selected asset from the content browser. And then we can take the metal color and we can multiply it by a preset color that we define ourselves as well. And we can plug that into base color. So if you want to make your metal a little bit darker, you can. And then we have a metal displacement, which we won't be using. And then we have metalness, which is in our case metallic. So metalness. bring that here. And with these types of textures, you really only need a single channel because it's just a black and white. Like, think of it, either something is metallic or it isn't. RGB is a composite of 3 channels, red, green, and blue, whereas we can use the one with the highest contrast, and this refers to something else. Usually in games, when you have multiple texture maps, you can also pack, say, your metallicness, your roughness, and say your ambient occlusion, and another emissiveness. You could pack those separately into red, green, and blue, and then that way you save on performance and texture loading and memory if you pack your textures in a more efficient way. Again, this was done for a Blender setup, different story, but just making you aware of it. Next, we want to grab our normal map and put that in there. That automatically changes it to normal. And then we want to check the normal into normal. To note here is that the normal maps are for GL instead of DirectX, and that means that in general the fact is Unreal uses DirectX, so you can change your, and what that means is that the white channel, again, this refers back to the coordinate system from previously, is that all you have to know is open that texture and you can find, let me find it, flip green channel. That's all you have to click, and then save your asset, which just means that up and down gets inverted. Cool. Metal master. We've got metalness, and then we get our roughness here. Oops. Let's use the and again, for roughness, it's a single color value, so we just grab the R channel, perhaps. And you can play with the look. I mean, you can change specular. You can multiply these values to get different effects out of them, or you can subtract from them. So if you're not happy with this metal look, you can also look for other texture settings. But here is our default metal, doing metal things. Which is great. And you can see the toolbox now, because it's also using the metal materials, automatically gets updated as well. And let's do one more, and then one more, and then one more. Okay. Textures. Let's do the tubes. The tubes in Blender were done through displacement. You can do displacement textures in Unreal, but I think for the purposes of it's already not like the most performant mesh in general. So let's do it with just a normal map. And we got base color. So bring in the base color. Save. Cool. And in case of these tubes, they are actually using a different UV channel, which is what I was talking about before. So in Blender, if we select our tubes and we go to the object data properties, you can see like there's multiple UV maps. UV map 1 is sort of like a composite of all the UV maps. Pattern map in this case refers to like patterns, like the tubing. So what that means is we need to switch the texture coordinates that we use to sample these textures from 0 to 1. And then instead of like going through each texture sample to have to update it to 1, we just do one texture coordinate here, set that to 1, plug that in there, and off we go. And then in the material in Blender, I then tiled that texture a bunch of times to get like more tubing pattern in there. And to do that is, if you think about it, if we have a UV space of 0 to 1, we can just multiply that by a value to stretch it out further. So that one we can convert to parameter and call it tiling. And we're going to tile it. Let's start with 5 times. So, boom. Cool. Now this looks better already. Let's bring in some of the other textures. So there's height, there is the metallic value. Oh. Metallic. Here's our normal map. This should be read as a normal map. I'm not sure why not. Control B to find the asset. Open this one. Make sure this is set as a normal map in the compression settings. Save it. And in this case, this will also have to be inverted. Flip the green channel and save that. Then this has to change from color to normal. And we plug that into UVs. Plug that into normal. And then that is a very weak effect. So we can increase the intensity of that by multiplying those values a bunch as well. So maybe not. What am I missing? I set it to 1. Cool. Maybe. All right, anyway. And I mean, we can keep going through each material now, or exporting more components, or we can open up to some Q&A, because I mean, this is just going to keep going. It is a tedious process. It takes quite a while to go through. If you ever wonder how if you need reference for how the shaders were constructed inside of Blender and then use that as a base to recreate it in the material editor in Unreal, you can always just click on individual pieces and change your viewport to the shader editor. They don't translate one-to-one, but the principles of it are still the same. So you can, whenever you see like a green box like this means this is a group. So you can click on the group and you can press tab to go inside of the group. And I did my best to try and color code it and break it up into its individual pieces, but you have like the main pattern going on over here. That means sort of like if you own something that has the Grinch pattern or something else, this is where that happens. Then you have here where the edge damage happens, you have where the dirt happens, and then all of that gets output to the shader. And the reason it looks so like cut up is because, well, obviously for the final export to give people their Blender files, we had to like programmatically go into the shader editor and cull all the pieces that are not meant for that particular seeker. So, and then again, if people have like particular questions on how to recreate a certain material inside of Unreal, or they just want tips and tricks, you can always ask questions on Discord, or Google is your best friend. Like there's so much. I learned most of what I know through Google, just looking up stuff. So there is that. But I think at this point, I'm going to hand over to Monty, and then we can either take questions or, yeah.
Cool, awesome. Yeah, well, thanks for that, Moritz. That was very, very good. Yeah, I think that we should hand it off to some questions just before we release the POAP thing and get all that underway. So if there are any questions, please pop them in the chat now. We would love to answer them.
I think, one thing to sort of stress, I mean, people may or may not have noticed how much work it is to actually bring this over to Unreal at a decent quality. So anybody who's thinking about joining the 3D competition, I would highly, highly, highly recommend, if you already have something in Unreal, render that out, use it as a background in the Blender composite, which we went over at the start of this tutorial.
Yeah.
And use it as a backup. So that way you have something to hand in. And then if you want to go through the Unreal, because there's a lot of learning, there's a lot of stuff to like figure out, do that. It's great. I love the fact that people are interested in learning it, but there is a lot of things that have to be done manually. And I'm happy to help as much as I can, but like it's not as straightforward as click a button and then it's there, because in the future, there may or may not be other assets that we provide where that's going to be the case, where you can just click a button and then it's in Unreal. It's certainly possible to set something like that up. It's just that with this particular asset, it was primarily meant for Blender. It can obviously be used in Unreal. And I'm just saying, if you don't have the mental fortitude, let's put it that way, to like grind this out,
Yeah.
It is a lot of work. And I've already spoken to a couple of people from the community who are working on getting it into Unreal. And there is a certain level of excitement from those people to work on this. And that is really what is required to get this like done 100%. Yeah. But I hope like for those people, this is a good jumping on. Like this is the cleanest way, in my opinion. Like if I was to do this as a production myself, this is how I would go about it.
So yeah, if you're thinking about doing it in Unreal, maybe do it in Blender, is the TDR.
At least as a like first measure. Have something done in Blender. And then like I said, I highly encourage people to do it in Unreal just for the learning experience. Unreal is such a fun thing to play around with and work on. So
yeah. Give it a go. Yeah, awesome. Very, very good. But yeah, well, with that, I will give you all a couple of minutes to think about some questions. And just as we do that, Moritz, tis the time, as we did with the last animation tutorial that we did. We did award POAPs for those who participated. So I am wondering, what is your POAP word for this tutorial? Do you have a favorite?
Favorite?
Yeah.
I should have thought of one before we did the stream.
Yeah.
Or maybe it can be tradition that we pick something up. Lawnmower.
Lawnmower.
Shredder.
Repeat again. I can't.
How about Hot Mic Mikey? Hot Mic Monty.
Hot Mic Monty is definitely appropriate. Yeah, I'm just so glad that I wasn't like watching something or listening to something that was like really crazy. So I'm like, that's good. But yeah, so is it Hot Mic? What's your word gonna be?
Yeah, I think Hot Mic. That would be good.
Amazing. All right, ladies and gentlemen. Well, you heard it here first. The POAP word is indeed Hot Mic. So get on into the Seekers Discord if you are not already. Raise a ticket, pop in Hot Mic, and we will send you over your POAP for today. This has been a wonderfully informational tutorial today, Moritz. Thank you so much. Just before we head off as well, if there are any more questions that you have for Moritz, or maybe you are you're using your 3D files at the moment for the animation comp or your fluff party bear, whatever 3D files you are using, and you want some more advice, tips and tricks, please feel free to jump into our Discord. You can DM us at any time, at us at any time, and we will help answer those questions. And when I say we, I mean Moritz, because I obviously am not the animator. But yeah, so please do. We are at your disposal. So that would be wonderful. And then and let us know what you'd like us to cover next. We're really into this series and just like letting people learn a lot about the 3D files, because obviously in our ecosystem we have 3D files for almost all of our digital assets. So we'd love to help you use them in whatever way, shape, or form you would like. But yeah, awesome. Well, if there's no more questions, I'm gonna bid you adieu. Any final remarks, Moritz?
No. I hope that this was actually of use for people, and fingers crossed that people manage to figure out how to get this over. The 3D worlds, it's the same software. What do you mean by 3D worlds? I'm just reading the comments.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
The 3D world in they currently see in the background of the Seeker is like a default scene that Unreal supplies. So if you install Unreal and you open up like a blank project file, it comes with that project file. You can then create your own environment or add to it. My recommendation on that would be to, on Google, look up Quixel Bridge. I gave Monty a quick preview of that last time, which is like a huge collection of photo scanned assets that Unreal acquired that a while ago. So you can, as long as you have an Epic account, you can use those assets as long, I don't know about the commercial use, but for like the purposes of this competition, I'm sure you can. Yeah. So look up how to use Quixel Bridge, and then you can like build your own environment around your Seeker fairly easy. And those ones actually come in automatically. So you just press a button, I want that asset, and it like brings it into the engine with the textures, with everything.
Already ready for you. It is good. I did see that one last time. I was like, oh, this would be easy if I was doing animation comp. So Quicksilver Bridge? Quicksilver Bridge.
Quixel. The company is called Quixel.
Okay.
And the software is called Bridge. And just sign up with your Epic account, like your Unreal Epic account, and have a look on YouTube. There's a bunch of tutorials on how to set it up so that when you are in Quixel Bridge, you press a button and it shows up in Unreal. Like,
cool. Perfect. DJ Mick introduces how many Seekers are you going to sacrifice, Moritz? I think I'm going to leave it on a controversial note. How many are you going to sacrifice?
It's sacrilege. I won't be doing no such thing.
Thank you.
I love my babies.
Yeah.
Like,
it literally is.
It's one thing for other people to do that, but I think if you created something yourself and then throw them in the bin, that's a bit sad.
It's a bit sad. It's a bit, yeah, it is. Yeah. Fair enough. Well, thank you for that. Thank you for that question, DJ. I also hope that these tutorials help those who are thinking about sacrificing Seekers understand all of the hard effort, energy, and love that went into them, which is why we shouldn't sacrifice them. And that's going to be my final remark of the afternoon. So thank you all so much for coming, everybody, and we will see you next time.
Sweet. Cheers, guys.
Bye. Oh.